Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Courtney Forehand. I am the Training and Marketing Specialist at CML. For those of you who are elected officials and have registered, you will be receiving university credits for today's webinar. This webinar, along with the presentation materials, will be posted to our website at www.cml.org under training materials by the end of this week. For those of you who are not familiar with the webinar format, you should see a control panel to the top right of your screen. There's an orange arrow to the left of the panel, which will minimize the entire box. All participants will be muted for the webinar, but we encourage you to ask questions by typing them into the question box on the control panel. We will hold a Q&A near the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type the questions as you think of them throughout the presentation. Today's webinar is titled Making Smart Cities Simple, Resiliency for the New Normal World, and our panelists are Ed Barrett and Dave Zelenok from HR Green. At this time, I'm going to hand things over to these gentlemen to start their presentation.
Well, Courtney, thank you very much. This is Dave Zelenok, and also we have Ed Barrett this afternoon. We'd like to talk for a bit about, obviously, making smart cities simple, or resiliency for our new normal, or as some people are now saying, for our new abnormal. The presentation runs, I think we have about 40 to 50 or so slides, and hopefully there'll be some nuggets in there for everybody to understand, come away with in the next 45 minutes or so, both with some answers to your specific questions. We'll have a little time left over to do that, and maybe offer some thought-provoking ideas, which may linger on for a while. So without further ado, again, I'm Dave Zelenok. I spent quite a few years. My background is with the city of Colorado Springs. I was their public works and transportation director for about 15 years, and then I went off to the city of Centennial, where I did a few crazy things there, including for about a year as their Centennial's interim city manager, their public works director, and something they call their chief innovation officer. So worked around Colorado with municipalities for over 20 years or so. Ed likewise has a lot of great experience, and as we turn it over to him in a few minutes, I'll be delighted to have him give a brief introduction as well. So with that, the first slide, just kind of like to walk through talking about, there's a lot of discussion now going on about getting smarter, and we've actually borrowed this from the Ameritrade Financial, but I love the old get smart or get smarter is kind of where we're going with this overall presentation today. So hopefully when we're all done, you'll be getting smarter. No big surprise, the Internet of Things is rapidly accelerating in the rate of rise. In other words, it's getting faster and faster, exponential growth, some call it skyrocketing. But really what this is all about, as we all know, is that the demand for bandwidth is increasing exponentially. The amount of devices there is increasing exponentially. And I also came across a very interesting tidbit yesterday that it took for the phone, it took about 100 years to get the first 100 million users. There was a recent app that went out. It got 100 million users in 30 days. And so when you look at the rate of adoption of some of these new technologies, it's just crazy in terms of people adopting these new technologies at an absolutely unprecedented rate. Speaking of that, just historically, people talk a lot about 4 industrial revolutions. No big surprise, in the 1700s, steam power was all the rage. Then in the 1800s, we started to fiddle futz with electricity. Early in the last century, the 1900s, computers became known as the 3rd industrial revolution. And really what we're seeing now is there's a lot of talk about the 4th industrial revolution, and I won't spend a lot of time there talking about this, but really it comes down to these 6 or 7 new technologies: artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things we talked about already, 5G, data transmission. We'll talk a lot about the telecommunications piece, the technologies that will fundamentally change our world in terms of its transportation, its telecommunication, it's the confluence really of all these new things, and of course smart cities is a very big part of that. So
yeah,
Ed, you want to talk
absolutely, Dave. Thank you. This is Ed Barrett, and I head our fiber and broadband practice, so have the pleasure of working with communities across the country to help them begin to define their strategy for advanced communication, and specifically for smart city, which, as we all know, has become even more important sort of in this abnormal, normal, new normal that we're all sort of marching to with COVID and the virus situation. One of the impacts, however, that that we also are seeing, and that is going to happen as a result of this fourth industrial revolution, maybe has less to do with the specific details of smart cities, but we also like to think about how this is going to impact the factories, the manufacturing, the industrial environment, because this revolution is going to have a dramatic effect. So today, factories are made up of sort of people and machines working together. The futurists are really talking about a campus solution of technologies where that convergence that Dave was talking about is going to just dramatically drive a real change in the economics of work. Connected devices are going to begin to talk to each other. They're going to begin to solve their own problems. And all of that requires, sensors and high-speed communication and things to happen in essentially real time. Importantly, in a post-COVID world, that will allow people to manage these systems, not standing at a workstation, not standing alongside of each other on a factory floor, but remotely. It will enable people to not have to be physically at a workstation to complete work as this revolution continues to evolve.
Yeah, so speaking of revolutions evolving, here's a slide that I actually love to use. It talks about really the convergence of some of these smart city technologies. There's an awful lot of talk, as many of you may know, talking about autonomous cars and driverless cars. By the way, there is a difference. A driverless car simply has no steering wheel, where autonomous cars, you can buy a Tesla this afternoon, and it is a fairly autonomous vehicle. What I find really intriguing, though, about this convergence, as Ed was saying, as we go into smart cities of the future, the convergence of telecommunications and transportation is one area that we'll spend some time talking about today. The telecommunications end, you'll hear some talk about V2V, vehicle to vehicle, and V2I. And it's no big surprise that if you're a Denver area metro transit user, historically, up until very recently, transit would typically carry about 5% of the total trips, total ADT. Carpooling up before the pandemic, maybe another 5% of total trips would be done by carpooling. Telecommuting, again, this is pre-pandemic. We are seeing actually pretty significant, in those terms, 10 to 20% telecommuting. A lot of people are saying now that this number will never be this low again. What I find absolutely intriguing, though, is that when you are able to have the V2V, the vehicle to vehicle, the V2I, you've got the telecommunications backbone, the distance between these cars, whether they're autonomous or driverless, the distance can shrink dramatically. This shows several inches between vehicles. Actually, many of the things we've written, in fact, I've even written in the NSPE, the Professional Engineers magazine, a few months ago, talking about the increase in capacity per lane isn't 5% or 10% or 20%, it's about 300%, a threefold increase in the number of vehicles per hour per lane. That has some profound dramatic effects if you believe it. And by the way, 300% is only shrinking the car distance or the distance between bumpers down by about half what it is today. What you're seeing there on the left in those little red driverless cars would take that up to 400 or 500 times that. Why that's important, though, is that when you look at post-pandemic, there's really four things that we think are really, truly going to be important here. Number one is, as I said, these autonomous cars, driverless cars will give us a phenomenal amount of excess capacity. So widening jobs, I mean, if you have all this extra capacity on I-25 and every lane takes 3 times the amount of cars that it used to, that's quite a ways off. But you need to do a lot of widening. And so do the Dr. Cog or PPACG models, are they still valid? There's, what's also interesting in stimulus programs are talking about pouring money in infrastructure spending. So we could be widening, let's say I-25 or I-70 for capacity that maybe in 5 or 10 years won't be needed as much. So the stimulus program will help maybe exacerbate the problem of overbuilding. That's a thought we've never had. Telecommuting will likely equal some demand reduction. Brian Weimer with Arapahoe County just shared yesterday about how there's been a phenomenal weekday demand reduction, which doesn't seem to be recovering much. No big surprise there. So telecommuting, we'll see probably a permanent demand reduction. And then the fourth thing here, just want to point out, is that as Ed said earlier, probably never in our history or our lifetimes have we seen the telecommunications and the need for, and we'll talk here about 5G and gigabit cities, but the need for telecommunications has never been higher. And the only way really to get smart is if you have the backbone, and that's where a lot of what we'll be talking about will be going. So talking very briefly about some of these macro trends that we're seeing out there. No big surprise that there's urbanization and suburbanization going on. A lot of the futurists are talking now about after 10 or 20 years of millennials flocking to the downtowns, maybe now they're realizing that if you're living downtown Denver in a condo and they slap another pandemic on you, maybe you don't want to be in a condo. And so there's some talk now about a reversing of the urbanization going to suburbanization. Another term that's out there is the Uberization. So there's urbanization and maybe a retreat to the suburbs, all the while the sharing economy is having a big influence on that. As I mentioned, telecommuting could mean permanent working from home, teleeducation, telehealth, and largely consumer demands are all changing. So where the cities go in the future, it's really difficult right now to predict where it's going, other than we know that the future will be like the past. And in fact, the future certainly isn't what it used to be. It's one of my favorite sayings. So Ed, talk about smart world and kind of where this is going, and when we look at sensors and the infrastructure that will really allow this to happen.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. You know, I think Dave, your view of sort of where society is moving is always very interesting. You know, as you narrow down a little more specifically to where communities are trying to adjust and adapt to this sort of world of change, I think you know there are probably not a lot of communities out there that haven't at least begun to develop an awareness, if not maybe some early thoughts and early pilots of smart city. And I think one of the things that we've seen across our footprint is that, you know, smart just isn't simple. And I'm not going to try to explain these graphics other than the fact to say that if these are simplifications of smart city, then we must be dealing with something that's pretty darn complicated. And I think that in that environment, what we're tending to see, and thanks to the McKinsey Institute for what they've provided and the research they've done on smart cities in the mega cities on a global basis, is that, you know, as communities begin to think about smart, they in many cases are still thinking on a pilot project basis. They're thinking, how can we solve a problem in the area of waste? You know, let's do a pilot with you know, automated you know, self dumping trash cans. Let's do a pilot with an advanced ITS solution, and that those projects in many cases are being driven by a single department with a single goal or a single objective, and that you know, there are some common applications that are emerging out of that, but that in many cases these are still sort of individual projects that emerge out of, you know, sort of one person or one department that wants to accomplish a singular goal. And that really is creating, I think, some challenges in meeting the global execution of smart city. So the McKinsey Institute also, and I love the research that they've done on this, really do talk about, and if you look at these layers, you know, that every community has its traditional sort of physical and, you know, people infrastructure, you know, and communities are very good at managing that, right? We are sort of a community in CML and elsewhere of people that are good at figuring out how to manage roads and sewers and streets and, you know, and traffic signals and all of the traditional infrastructure that's out there. McKinsey argues that in order to move to a smart community and truly gain the benefit, right? Because ultimately this concept of smart isn't just for itself, it's to become better and more responsive to the community. And they argue that the first step in this process is the orange level, which is they call the tech base. And this includes a network of connected devices and sensors, and you've seen a couple of examples earlier where communities are looking at trying to leverage, communications networks and sensors and devices, and that once you have that and you've sort of solved that problem, you then have the ability to go to the layer where you begin to deploy smart applications. And that involves getting data and running analysis and ultimately providing that at the top layer to the adoption and use side. And you end up ultimately, if you've done this correctly, with this virtuous cycle of communities that have created infrastructure that talks to residents and businesses and consumers. And ultimately, those consumers and residents and businesses provide data that makes the system better, and in turn making it more useful, in turn making it better. And so this model really is sort of fundamentally a look at how do you take infrastructure and make it smarter in a way that moves citizens to action.
Yeah, and along those lines, the question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ed. You could.
No, go ahead, Dave.
No, just about to say that speaking of action, the constituents or citizens are now demanding a whole list of things that were unimaginable just 5 or 10 years ago. Back in the flip phone days, you couldn't imagine adopting these smart city technologies. And to Ed's point, there's a lot of things about what to do, and maybe more importantly, what not to do. You can't avoid this. Resistance is futile, as they used to say in the old Martian movies, Earthling. Resistance is futile. It's coming. The question is it too expensive to solve yourself? It probably is. As a city government in Colorado these days, we're strapped for cash, and we get that. But we're seeing a lot of work now. You think of the Googles and Apples, and we'll talk about that here in a little while, forming partnerships with cities on not big data anymore, not open data, but really it's about partnerships and sharing. And then these isolated solutions, ITS fiber, we did a great job. I'll just brag up Centennial. We'll talk about that in a moment here. ITS fiber really is no longer intelligent transportation. It's not just traffic signal fiber anymore. There's a whole other lot of uses from the excess capacity that comes with that. So I'm talking about likewise the future will look at really connecting when it comes to municipal infrastructure, connecting everything, street lights, utilities, energy, you name it. These are all connectable, sensorable. Technology is the enabler. And as I said earlier, really this telecommunications, as Ed called it, the backbone or this tech base is absolutely crucial. Without the tech base, it's very, very difficult to do that. And that, of course, takes a strategic plan. So I'd like to run through a few examples about becoming smart and some real life Colorado and some experience we've gained from other parts of the country. A few shout outs here from some of our clients in Colorado cities. First out, a huge shout out. I don't know if there's anybody on today from Greenwood Village, but kudos, hats off to them, and a big salute and a shout out. You may know that Xcel Energy has about 100 plus cities and districts that they provide energy to. Huge shout out to Greenwood Village, in part to them taking some advice that we shared with them about, say, street lights, not traffic signals, street lighting. I just learned yesterday from the city manager in Greenwood Village, they are actually, they have closed the deal. PUC has given a thumbs up, green lights, and they now own about 1,000 street lights, which is by itself phenomenal. We'll talk about that in a moment. But for Greenwood Village, that means a significant annual budget reduction in future years. And I think even more importantly, they now have 1,000 platforms, 1,000 street lights, 1,000 locations where they have power. Three-dimensionally, it goes vertically above the streetscape. And if you can bring some fiber optics into the streetlights that Greenwood Village now owns, you've got an incredibly powerful positioned city for a smart city of the future. So that's pretty cool by itself. And talking about streetlights, streetlights really are now being thought of as, it's not just a streetlight anymore, but rather streetlights, we look at them are really an intersection of the traditional infrastructure with new technologies. And so all this new technologies, I won't read all the applications. If you can think of it, you can do smoke detectors, crowd detectors. You can put up sensors so that if somebody's violating social distance in an area within line of sight of a street light, you can send over somebody to remind them, hey, we're not allowing clusters of people. If you want to sense it, probably chances are right now that you can sense it. But the point there is nothing really happens in a vacuum. You have to determine the strategy, lay out the infrastructure, as Ed said first, and then chart a course into the future. So streetlights, a huge platform for the future. What I think really is even more important, and I'll just use Greenwood Village as the poster child, Exhibit A in our list of case studies here. They will no doubt, Greenwood Village, the village people, as I love to call them, will no doubt reap hundreds of thousands, probably over years, millions in both cost avoidance and cost savings. As I said earlier, there's this value in assets that is undeniable, good on them. They'll be able to now change out their high pressure sodium 1960s bulbs with LED bulbs. That's pretty good. So they will cut their power bill down by maybe 50%. But you know, power is only about 20% of the total cost. That when you're paying $20 per street light per month, and you have 1,000 street lights, that's a pretty doggone big bill for any city. More importantly, though, these are all, as I said earlier, these are all platforms for sensors, counters, and really where the future is going. We'll talk here in a moment about the 5G enabled small cells that we're seeing. So the bottom line is that when it comes to revenue source, yes, you're saving $20 a month. That's $240, $250 a year in savings. You can also use those platforms and lease the street light if it's fiber optic connected. It's got power already. $250-ish is not unreasonable. We saw one case where Las Vegas effectively wasn't charging $250 per street light per year. They were wanting to charge Verizon $6,000 per street light per year, and they are getting sued. So I would not recommend that at this point. There's some issues there. But even more important than the revenue source you can get from renting those out of small cell transmitter sites, surprisingly, we like to say the conduit may be even more valuable in interconnecting, because everybody's going to be wanting fiber ubiquitously. And so there's revenue sources, there's cost avoidances, and there's the value of the conduit that's already underground that may also be out there and available. Talking briefly about a great client of ours up in the high country, city of Aspen. We just wrapped up a small cell policy for them. They just posted a few weeks ago on the Aspen website. It's available, I'm sure. That's great. So they are now aesthetically requiring a different set of standards for the small cells and 5G platforms that are coming in. More importantly, though, than defense, we like to say is that they're going on offense. Things like plug and play sites, neutral hosting, co-locations. In other words, working proactively with all the small cell providers out there, we think is even more important than the reactive or the defensive side that a lot of cities are playing. And actually, a lot of cities right now aren't even playing the defensive side. So there's defense versus offense. And then I think, Ed, the last couple slide points I want to make here is about these small cells. You know, typically, if you're on a cell phone right now, your transmitter is probably about 3 miles from your cellular device. The new distance will be about 300 feet. And so from 3 miles to 300 feet, there's going to be a tidal wave of attachments. As we mentioned, all these sensors. But I think really what if I can do a foot stomper here as a takeaway is really this term in the industry now called densification. I don't like that word. What it means, here's a typical square mile. I think this is of a Connecticut city that's going from 7 macro towers, 7 regular cell towers per square mile, up to, would you believe, 109. 109 small cell towers is the ultimate deployment. This assumes millimeter wave. I won't bore you with all the details there, but that's an incredible increase in density. And as best we understand it, that's per carrier. Now, there's only 3 carriers now. You know, Sprint and T-Mobile merged a few weeks ago, but this could be 109 worst case times 3 carriers per square mile. Take the number of square miles, look at the numbers. It's a huge, huge, huge amount. Some examples of some small cells. On the left there, you can see a street light pole. And just to highlight, there's a little red circle there you go, that pops up. It's a great example of how to do a small cell integrated with a street light, but think about the RF energy. I would not want to be in that 2nd or 3rd story patio with, it could be 5 watts, it could be 500 watts of radiation coming there. And we'll talk about the RF issues here in a moment. In the middle there, that's downtown Denver. It's a great looking cigar tube, as some people call it, or a standalone pole. But you could argue, gosh, couldn't they have reduced the clutter and combined that standalone pole, which they have the right to install, with the existing furniture. On the right is a traffic signal pole, and the far right is from a Laguna Beach client. They did a visualization of kind of a blended one there. Here's a couple of pictures from Centennial, just showing really managing what's on the ground. On the left there, just a good example of that. On the right there is Dry Creek Road over in Centennial. It's a project I worked on not too long ago that combines, it's a Verizon stealth tower integrated to, they put up a traffic signal at their own expense. And if you look real closely behind there, there's all the ground equipment. It's hidden on the left there underground, or on the right there, that little gray fence with the brick columns is I think a pretty well hidden stealth ground location. Next slide. Ed, you want to talk briefly about some of the health effects?
Yeah, I think, Dave, the other thing that, and what we're trying to do here is to give you some real practical kind of grounded ideas, right? So what are progressive communities doing to not only sort of understand what's coming at them, but to get ahead of it? And I think that this health concern issue with 5G, really becomes an issue that, the science is pretty undecided. The FCC has referred back to a 20-some-year-old ruling and said there are no health effects. There are strong proponents in your communities that will say, heck no, we don't want it. It's going to irradiate us. It's going to create health concerns. And the reality is that the FCC in many cases does tie the hands of communities in terms of your ability. But we have been helping communities find creative ways to at least manage the context of these issues. And Dave, I think you were going to talk a little bit about that relative to some work we've done in Colorado.
Yeah, so we actually are helping a number of local governments in Colorado and other places with this RF issue, this radiation issue. So this is a picture actually of my house because I didn't want to use somebody else's house to illustrate this. But if you look closely, there's a street light not too far. That's Ellsworth Street, Cheyenne Mountain area. And the street light concern that I would actually have is that if one of the cellular providers came in there and wanted to pop in a small cell tower, since there'll be probably about 2 small cell towers, if you believe the millimeter wave requirement and the techie people, the 109 towers per square mile, if you believe that, and I have reason to, then chances are that streetlight there is going to be radiating right into my son's bedroom, which is about 30 feet away, and that would cause me concern. So what we really try to encourage people to do and cities to do is on the right there, you can see one typical radiation pattern. But every cell tower has a radiation pattern. We would strongly encourage you to ask for those reports, review those reports, and then do some calibration certification. Make sure what they say we're putting up there is what they're putting up there, and they don't change it, because we've seen a lot of instances where these cell towers are designed by somebody out of town. They don't realize, oh, it's a 3-dimensional issue. And because, as the slide showed there, you got a transmitter goes up 20 feet, but the house goes up 30 feet. You can very easily, unintentionally, radiate a house in excess of, as Ed said, the max permissible exposure, the MPE, which is the FCC guideline. So it is a big deal. Not to get overly concerned, but we strongly recommend a very close look at those by cities. Ed, talk to us about Chicago O'Hare Airport and some of the great work you're doing there.
Yeah, Dave, so I think that, the challenge that we see sort of consistently as we talk to communities around the country is that there is a need to go on defense, right? You have a goal to manage the aesthetics in your community. You have a responsibility to your community to protect the health and safety of residents. And at the same time, businesses need this technology. Your residents are clamoring for enhanced services. Nobody wants to be on their Apple, iPhone 2 when the 10X comes out. And so, the providers are doing a great job of generating massive amounts of sort of marketing buzz around 5G, and I don't think that's going to stop. And what we're seeing in terms of going on offense is examples like this. And I'll walk through it because there are some communities who recognize that with the change in manufacturing, with the change in technology, that we as a community want to position ourselves to be a beneficiary of the economic development impact of these manufacturing changes. So they're going on offense. This is an example of our client, Elk Grove Village. You can see in the bottom right of that graphic, the northwest corner of O'Hare Airport. This business park is, interestingly enough, the largest business park in North America. And Elk Grove decided, you know, this is a 70s, 80s era business park. It has good fiber connectivity. It's filled with, you know, manufacturing and data center jobs, but they recognize that there are jobs that they would like to attract to the market. They want to bring high-paying, high-tech jobs to the area, and there's a belief by Elk Grove that we share that creating a partnership to bring 5G, to bring advanced communication and technology can it enable the automation needs that are going to happen in the future, and will attract the right types of businesses so that that business park can not only become the largest, but also the smartest business park in North America. Elk Grove Village has a significant amount of, as you would expect with major rail and being that close to O'Hare, a lot of transportation logistics. So one of the keys for them was creating an infrastructure that not only is smart from a manufacturing perspective, but also as we talk to businesses in the technology or the business park, you know, are interested in becoming part of, you know, near real-time supply chains. So as you think about transportation logistics, supply chains are becoming ever more compressed. You know, the need to track RFID tags in near real time becomes more and more important, and the management of the assets to transmit and deliver products and goods across those supply chains become increasingly important. So developing a technology, as Dave pointed out, there's a, you know, a consumer, you know, residential transit piece to autonomous vehicles. There's also a very, very real, you know, commercial application of this technology. In fact, I think I-25 has the honor of hosting one of Coors' first fully autonomous semis that rolled through town here within the last year or year and a half. So those things as well are coming. You know, I think the other piece is that communities are beginning to try to find ways to future-proof themselves. The Aurora Highlands, a new development, a new master plan community, immediately to the south of not O'Hare, but Denver Airport, was looking for ways to sort of differentiate themselves in the market and create hooks to attract residents and developers. And they recognized that they did not want to be in the position of owning and managing advanced communications. So they went out to market to identify a partner that could bring converged fiber optics, a scalable set of macro towers, 5G enabled smart streetlight poles, carrier grade Wi-Fi, and other services into the development. And you know, really that model is new, but it's one that has been, you know, tested in the market in Denver previously, and one that we see continuing with an interesting side note of this, that in some cases, these types of projects actually can begin to throw off revenue sharing and additional revenue streams for communities. Another example, and this is probably one of the more overlooked pieces of this coming deployment of the technology core, and that means that all of the 5G, all of the hyperconnectivity that is being planned and executed in this country requires an asset that is going to dwindle and become less and less available. The right-of-way of communities. So this is an example of a community, a suburban community in the central Iowa area. This is a right-of-way that's been flagged with communication, dry utility infrastructure. You may not be able to walk on the flags, but you can certainly surf across them. And the point here is this is a road that was put in with right-of-way just 8 or 9 years ago. And you can already see the congestion and the challenges that begins to bring. So West Des Moines recognized that we have an issue, and providers, we have an issue that's not just our problem, but this is a shared problem, because we want you to be able to reach consumers. We want you to be able to have access to our right-of-way to serve and help us develop the community. So how can we future-proof this? West Des Moines' response was to create some very interesting policy and some shared infrastructure plans where they're putting joint use conduit into the right-of-way. And you can see in this example a 12 conduit duct bank. So this entire duct system and the handhole system below it, instead of taking 18 inches per provider and using that whole right-of-way, exists in a trench that might take up 12 to 16 inches. So suddenly you've protected a valuable asset for the future and enabled people to get where they need to be. Lastly, I think as an example, and then we'll talk about what you can do practically in terms of next steps. We have been working with a community in the LA area, Pico Rivera, who again is beginning to put together the concept of a converged deployment. So they had a number of sort of things that were beginning to align that aligned with HR Green's thinking. There was a desire to upgrade the city infrastructure. They're municipalizing their streetlights. They're beginning to look at implementing signals controls, and needed really a plan for fiber optic strategy in the community. They have been actively working towards developing a fiber optic system, a technology core that will drive streetlights as a platform for 5G, again, as we mentioned, signals that drive mobility upgrades. It's a very high commuter through city. So a lot of transit, people going in and out of downtown LA come through this community. They want to upgrade their IT network, and again, having that technology core not only allows them to look at what can we deploy to smarten the community, but can we also reach out and, in Colorado, there is certainly a push for community-based broadband. Pico Rivera is also assessing sort of business and resident satisfaction with broadband as a piece of this. Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about this model, I think this is an interesting example of what this convergence and multi-purpose use can really accomplish.
You bet, Ed. Thanks for the great overview. And looks like we're down to about 25 minutes or so, right on schedule, which is good. So Centennial, I think I mentioned I served in a number of capacities there for several years. One of the things that we ended up doing, this is a screenshot. Centennial at the time had, I think, about 80 traffic signals. And so every green dot, red dot on the graphic there was just a screenshot from one point in time. At the time that we started this initiative with Centennial to improve or build what Ed calls, and the McKinsey Institute calls a tech base, they had almost no fiber optics. All the traffic signals were simply either wireless or they were on their own clocks running by themselves. Over the course of several years, the city was able to put in about $600,000-ish. Again, that depends on how you define that. Some were Dr. Cog dollars that had CDOT, Federal Highway, you name it, but about $600,000 in a co-location program that we did. Fast forward a few years later, every pipe that went in the ground basically came in, as it does to every city, comes in, you pull a permit, and what we ended up doing was a lot of co-location. So a little bit of money, $600K, turned into roughly a 60-mile network at the time, with arguably a value of $10 to $20 million for $600K. Even more important than that, though, I'll just give a little shout out again to Centennial. This is a picture of a billboard I took not too long ago. So with that tech base, with that 60 and now growing even more, that great fiber optic backbone Centennial has. And by the way, Longmont's in the same boat. There are a lot of cities that are taking this tack. This company, I'd never heard of them. Ting is a Google Fiber competitor. Ting came in and says, hey, you guys have miles and miles of fiber optic backbone. How about we come in? And this is just a billboard there off of Arapahoe Road, bringing crazy fast fiber internet, or gigabit speed fiber internet to Centennial, much as Longmont is now known as a gig city nationally. Longmont's doing it by the insourced model largely. Centennial's doing it by the outsourced model, or public-private partnerships. Ting is, I think, now one of a number of providers. Speaking of fiber optics and things cities can do with that, just a little heads up here. If you own a water meter, and a lot of cities do have some cities, I think there's 28 cities in Colorado that have their own power companies. So this definitely applies to you because recently, just in the last year or two, the manufacturers of metering, the meters, the power meters came out with a electric meter that has a fiber optic port. And so all of a sudden, if you own a city electric department, let's talk about Colorado Springs Utilities. They're the largest, I think, municipally owned electric provider in Colorado. They can now be looking at going from an automatic meter reading or AMR system. Usually it's a handheld device you walk around and you pick up a radio signal to automated metering infrastructure. And the ideal way to do that is a fiber optic connection. And so the question is can you burden the utilities for part of the cost of extending a ubiquitous fiber to the home network, which brings you gig service, partly on the backs of the utility company and arguably even the water department. So metering, fiber, ubiquitous gig steady stuff is all seeming, as Ed said, kind of converging now in the future there. I think what's important is really just to highlight a few things that really smart goals and smart cities. Historically and ancient history in the smart city stuff goes back, wow, a whopping 10 years ago. The first phase of these smart city deployments focused largely on what was and still is called big data. So if you think about IBM would come in with a one-size-fits-all software, hardware, in many cases, very excellent solution, but in some cases not really tailorable down to, we don't have a water department in our city. We don't need these kinds of functions. And so for a variety of reasons, the second phase, a whopping 5 years ago, went from big data to open data. A good example there that I'll share is Audi, for example, taps into many cities. I know if you're in Castle Rock shares their traffic signal data real time with Audi Corporation, and you're driving your Audi, you can know that because of the open data availability, that the traffic signal right ahead of you going into the mall, Castle Rock, that traffic signal will turn green in 11.2 seconds. There it goes. That's all due to open data. And while that's all pretty cool, that takes, again, a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of heavy development costs. The third phase, which is the one we're in now, the smart cities thing, really talks more about dashboards, action. A good example there is, so Google came out with a Google Map. Then Google Maps, as you now know, can interrelate its system to Uber. You can reserve a Marriott hotel. You can reserve United Airlines when the airlines start flying again. You can buy a ticket, get a hotel room, see what the traffic is, and grab your Uber ride. And oh, by the way, the next RTD light rail train will be here in 11.2 minutes. All those are now being interrelated. They're being driven largely in partnership, and they're being funded largely not by the municipalities, but they're being funded largely now by the private sector with the good old profit motive. So the one last point I'd like to make really is about sensors, dashboards, and action. These are a couple of slides for a dashboard system we developed just as an illustration up in Breckenridge, showing, for example, just to illustrate, these are parking lots. Where's the parking availability currently in downtown Breckenridge? You can detect anything you want with sensors. It only makes sense, though, to do that if you can have a dashboard where the data comes together. And really, that only makes sense is if you can take the dashboards and then do something with it, tell people about it, reduce congestion, improve safety, do something with it. So again, it all starts with that, the backbone through sensors, through a dashboard system of some sort to be able to execute some action off of that. Maybe we'll talk about Albert Einstein.
Yeah, Dave, just to finish up, and we'll try to go a little quick so we leave some time for Q&A. So if we buzz through a little bit, I think we've given you 55 minutes thinking about the problem, as our friend Albert Einstein says. 5 minutes at the end here about thinking about solutions. So as you think about the solution and how to begin to approach this, we strongly encourage you first, understand that communication assets, the assets that you have both in the ground and vertical assets like streetlights and poles, create capacity for you. They are assets that traditionally may have been a fixed expense that now become much more valuable in a converged and interconnected world. We encourage you, think about those things and think about how you're going to upgrade your public policies to support the deployment of more of those assets to become an enabler. And first, before thinking about pilots and what whiz-bang tech, create a vision, create a plan, create a high-level view of where you want to go, and then the execution of the plan becomes a lot more aligned with your community's broader goals. So step 2, creating that community capacity. Again, creating fiber, sensors, creating a technology core that you can then leverage. There was a question that we had after a similar webinar that said, well, what do we do if we deploy something for smart city and the technology changes? What we really encourage you is that if you're deploying single-use systems, the technology that's out there today is not going to be the technology that exists in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. It's part of why you partner with the private sector, is because as communities, you just can't keep up with the pace of that change. But deploying the technology core in a smart way, in a strategic way, enables you to avoid sort of the flavor of the day that's out of style tomorrow, right? Nobody wants to deploy the almond kitchen of the 70s because it kind of dates you. So create something that's timeless, create something that brings value over the next 20 or 30 or 50 years. Secondly, identifying an internal champion, identifying those community partners and seeking mutual benefit. Communities do not have to go on this journey by themselves. Schools and libraries and anchor institutions and key learning centers, and there are a lot of people in your community, businesses that are trying to achieve these goals, and seeking them out and creating coalitions and partnerships becomes a vitally important part of success in this world. Lastly, long-term, some changes, right? In the past, it used to be that governments were expected to deliver start to finish. We view that world very much as changing. If you have a plan, you can leverage those assets to facilitate the private sector. Creating competition, creating consumer choice are good things. It does require cities to rethink their policies, right? Making public assets available to the private sector is a bit of a bugaboo historically, but if you can create mutual advantage that encourages economic development, internet-based job creation, new business, the entrepreneurial economy, and encourages the private sector to put their investment dollars into your community, then you've suddenly created an opportunity to not only meet your goals, but to monetize the access to those connectivity assets. So, what can you do today? Well, first and foremost, if you're a big city with a lot of resources, go deploy them, begin to solve this problem. If you're not, think about how you can begin to establish first and foremost your vision, understand and create a better understanding of the needs across your departmental boundaries. For no fault of anyone's, people tend to work on the stuff that is right in front of them. They tend to work on their problems and their solutions. And we absolutely encourage you, create a master plan, create a strategy, and recognize that right now in a COVID environment, that the CARES Act is out there. There is funding that is available. There's funding that is being made available. It will probably go away pretty quickly, but there will be other opportunities for infrastructure investment. And we are seeing at this point in time a more dramatic understanding of the importance of fiber and connectivity as politicians and policymakers begin to understand that having 20% of your kids at home that can't connect to schools is a bad thing. Having elderly that can't go to doctor visits, that also can't do telemedicine, is a limiting factor in the safety and health of their communities. So there are funding streams out there. Tap into those. Find my favorite kind of money, which is OPM, other people's money, to begin to help you execute those strategies. Lastly, Dave and I are happy to, and hopefully you've come away, if you're 50 or older like Dave or I, you understood the reference to Get Smart. If you didn't, hopefully we help make you a little bit smarter through this, and we would love to continue to help answer any questions that you might have. And with that, we'll throw it up to the questions here for the last 10 minutes of the session.
Great. Thank you guys so much for your presentation. We don't have any questions at this time, so I just want to take a second to thank you guys. If there are any questions, please type them in so that we can get those questions asked to Dave and Ed before our webinar is over. Excuse me. Since we have a moment though, I do want to let all of our attendees know that HR Green will also be hosting another webinar with CML on July 16th. That webinar will be about water risk and resiliency assessments. So make sure that you tune in for that one as well. You can find that information on the CML website at www.cml.org. Yes, so I do have a question asking if people can get a copy of the presentation. All of these materials will be posted to the CML website as well as to the HR Green website. Last I spoke with a few people from over there, they wanted to post it in multiple places. One question that we have from Glenn is, what are the tools available to regulate the aesthetics of 5G towers? This is becoming a community concern.
Absolutely. The number one tool is actually, it doesn't take much. What we like to say is that, ideally an ordinance by city council is preferred. You can have a resolution by city council. It could be a city manager thing. We've even advised clients based on some solid legal opinions that simple posting. We did a small cell aesthetic standard review for the city of Thornton, what we advise them quickly is something at least on your website as interim standards for aesthetics of small cells. Start there, get it on the website. That way, if Verizon comes in, or more likely, it'll be a subcontractor for Verizon or T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, they're going to come in and you can just point, well, yeah, these are interim standards. We're working on our long-term permanent standards. In the meantime, here's the aesthetic rules. And as I said earlier, also strongly recommend that you also ask for those RF, the radio frequency radiation energy reports that go kind of a step above and beyond the aesthetic requirements and the RF requirements as well. Make sure that they're in compliance with the FCC. But you can just post those as interim documents on your website. And yeah, I think we've done what, Ed? At last count, 40, 50 cities of those. Aesthetic standards.
This is an issue that a lot of communities are trying to figure out, which is how can I maintain my aesthetic? And you know, the FCC has put unfortunately some handcuffs, and those rules are being challenged in court. And I know Dave and I have delivered webinars on 5G, so if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out. But I think Dave really did hit the high points. It's sort of managing the aesthetics above ground. It's managing the ground itself, and it's ultimately, you know, looking out for, and to the extent that you're allowed, having good health standards in place that are enforceable under the FCC rules.
A question that we have is, which cities would you recommend for looking at this verbiage for?
Probably the best one I do a shout out to Thornton was a great interim standard we did. The most recent one I think I mentioned was Aspen. We just wrapped up one for them a few weeks ago. But caution, caution, caution. What works very well in Aspen for lots of great, well-intended reasons may not work well in your community. So each one is custom tailored. Ed can tell you that of the 40 or 50 that we've overseen in just the last year or so that we've done, no two of them are exactly alike. But I think Aspen blends a lot of those in, and it's available as of last week or two on the website. So start there and give us a call. Happy to help.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from Murray, and this time it's our last question. Murray's asking, what is the status of getting a better handle on the health risks, whether they're real or not, of 5G?
Oh boy, that's
Dave, Dave, I know you've worked on those. This is sort of a passion point for Dave and I, and I want to just share one example that's not here. There's a community in Texas, McKinney, Texas, for those of you who know it, that we've been working with, who understood that they were likely to face, as Dave and the team helped to tackle in Aspen, a very organized community group that definitely had health concerns in the crosshairs. And so in McKinney, we actually went through that community group, loosely organized but influential, had put together sort of a, well, call it a binder, call it a flash drive of every article on the topic that they have ever accessed. And so we actually went through and helped the community catalog those in terms of reliability, in terms of their scientific founding. What is it, opinion? Is it peer reviewed? How valid is it? And that exercise, in fact, went through somewhere north of about 110 articles and published studies, along with about 20 or 30 supportive studies that the FCC has looked at. So the answer is yes. Somewhere in the middle, there's an answer. There are no great longitudinal studies of millimeter wave because that is so new in the marketplace. And so, you know, we tend to say, cities, you have to do the things that are smart. You have to do the things that the FCC will allow you to do, and write good policy, work with the providers to make sure that the equipment being deployed is context sensitive and meets the FCC requirements. But beyond that, you're not going to change the federal regulations unless you choose to become part of the 100 cities that have challenged them in court. And so that's a long answer to a short question, but it's a very hot topic for a lot of our partner communities.
Great, Ed, thank you so much. That was our last question. Do you guys want to make any final remarks?
Yep.
No, you're good? Oh, okay, great, thank you. So thank you so much to Dave and to Ed for presenting today and for sharing all of your knowledge with our members. Thank you to HR Green and to Marin for helping arrange this and for being willing to share this information with our members. Thank you, listeners and attendees, for attending and being a part of today's webinar. Just a reminder, you will be able to find this information on the CML website at www.cml.org under training materials. You can also go to networking and events and find lots of other upcoming webinars that CML will be hosting. And you'll also be able to find information about our virtual conference coming up in August. There's some information. So I'd like to just thank everyone for joining us today, and this concludes our webinar. So I hope you all have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Courtney, thanks a million. Good job.
You're welcome.